take this to. Let me see if that one has the recording button there. It does have start recording. So we're going to jump over to a new link. But I need to have a place that I can put it in the chat window. Let me see if I can tweet to you. Oh, I can see that it is recording now. Woo, okay, let me kill the other one then. This is craziness. Blab is really giving me some headaches. Okay, I'm going to kill off the other one. Let me shut this one out. Okay, now we are back, although I can't enter anything in the chat stream, not that I need to. Okay, thanks so much for helping me out with that, Mike. Okay, folks, sorry, it's 7 minutes after. We were dealing with a bit of technical difficulties here. Blab is in beta, and it seems like it's giving me the short end of the stick here today with getting things going. Fortunately, Mike was able to make his way in and get us live on air. So I'm Mark Isaacson. I am the host of this weekly Drupal chat. This week, we are going to be talking about choosing contributed modules. I would normally post the link to my Drupal.org user profile, except I can't get to the chat window right now. Yeah, I see you, Mike. You're fine. You're definitely on air right now. I'm Vegan Triathlete on Drupal.org. And this replay will be available on the teachyourselfdrupal.org website. Unfortunately, I can't put that information in the chat window for you right now because I don't have access to it. So, so we'll see about maybe putting it out onto Twitter later on, so you'd have that information available for you. So I'll launch right into things here and get the show started. And I'm going to hop back and forth between some of the tabs and programs that I have open. So the first thing that we need to do when we're going to be choosing contributed modules is to actually even find if the module exists. And one of the great things about Drupal is that there are just thousands and thousands of contributed modules. So there's a good likelihood that there is a module for that. When you're looking to do something, it's just going to be your job to find it. And so one of the first things that you can do when you're looking for a module is if you go to Drupal's home page, you will see that there's a link that's called Download and Extend. And that brings you to a main page that gives you some options of the ways that you can start looking for modules. And one of the things that you may want to do initially is have a look at the most installed modules, because you may find that that what you're looking to do is something that a lot of other people are already doing, and one of those most installed modules could set you off in the right direction. And you can scroll down, you can go from page to page and see if you find any of those most installed modules that will serve your purpose. It's possible that what you're doing is something that's going to be a bit more specific to your case. So it may not be a most installed module at all. And so another option that you have from that downloaded extend page is that you could search for modules by categories. And you can click on the all categories link, and that will show you another page. And it'll give you some ideas of the types of categories have and what those modules are in there. And so you may choose to go into one of the categories for what you're thinking that you want to be doing. So for example, one of the categories that I'm looking ahead of here is e-commerce. So maybe you're looking to build an e-commerce site, and you take a look in the e-commerce category there, and you'd have a look at what they've got there. Another one right below e-commerce is evaluation rating, and so that might give you stuff like 5-star, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one way that you can start your search in finding modules that you're going to put on your site, and that's just the basics right there, going off Drupal's website itself. Now, another option that you've got available for you, and by the way, all of these links that I'm mentioning will be available attached to the replay that I'll have on the teachyourselfdrupal.org website. So you'll see what it was that I was referring to when you have a look at the replay. And in fact, the stub is loaded up right now. If you went to teachyourselfdrupal.org, you would find that on the home page, the module that's there, module, the video that's there is the stub that's in place for the chat that I'm doing right now. And you'll see that I've already got the links loaded there. So another place that you can go to find Drupal modules, interestingly enough, is a site that's called DrupalModules.com. And that site has been around for a while. And people will rate modules, and they'll give their feedback about the modules. And that site can give you some ideas of things that you may want to use to help build out the functionality of your site. Another place that could actually give you some good inspiration is if you go to Drupal.org and you go to the case studies section. So that would be Drupal.org/case-studies. And as you read through the case studies, you will learn how people have built their sites, and they will give you ideas of which modules they chose and why they chose those modules. And when you go to the case studies page, you will see that there's the featured showcases, and then there's the community showcases. And so you can have a look through any of those things so that you can get some inspiration from there. So those examples that I gave you are places where you would go specifically and start poking around, looking at things. Now, another option that can actually work very well for you, and I use Google, but there's similar types of features that you can do with any of your favorite search engines, is that you would fire up the search engine, and what you want to do in the URL before you start putting in your keywords is you would say like site:/Drupal.org, and then hit the space, and then put in the keywords of the types of things that you're looking to do. So maybe you wanted to be able to do something like with sending out a newsletter, or doing something with like mailing lists or whatever. So you would do site:/Drupal.org, and then you would say mailing list or newsletters, and see the results that Google gives you, and that could help send you in the right direction. And then oftentimes, once you can find a module to look at, that can help you get from that module to another module and another module, because sometimes you'll see there's related modules that are on the page, or even the module maintainer might reference other modules that are similar. So that's the process that you can follow to get started with even finding whether a module is out there. And then it becomes the task to decide, well, which module are you going to use? And so for the rest of this conversation, obviously, I'm going to be assuming that you found more than one module that will suit your purpose. If there is one and only one module, then you don't have a choice, and then you see whether it works for you. You go with it. So what we're going to be looking at here is, so let's say you've come up with a number of different modules, and now you are trying to decide, well, which one of these modules should I be using? And I'm going to go through some ideas that you can keep in mind so that you can make a decision about, do I want this module or do I want a different module? The first thing that I want to make sure to state, which to me is something that's obvious, but as somebody who may be new to Drupal, it may not be so obvious. So I'm going to say that I'm stating the potentially not so obvious, is that you want to look on that project page for the module, and you want to look at the releases that the module has, because you have to know that the module you're considering is written to work with the version of Drupal that you are running. And that may eliminate some of the candidates for you, because you may find out, for instance, Drupal's been around for a while now, and you may find that you happen to come across a module that was written for Drupal 5, and maybe it's even been ported to Drupal 6, but maybe it never did get ported to Drupal 7, much less Drupal 8. So you want to take a quick look on the module page to see that, in fact, there is a release of the module that works with the version of Drupal core that you are using right now. And then the next thing that you want to do as you're looking through the project page is have a look at the description of the module. The module maintainer should have given you a description that helps you get some idea of whether this module is even going to be suitable for you or not. And furthermore, what you can get out of looking at the description is that you can start to get a feel for like how well thought out this module might be, how articulate the maintainer was able to be in the description of the module. And it can give you a sense, you just get that little bit of a way that you can start to maybe judge or evaluate whether the person who created this module seems to be organized and thoughtful in how that module is put together. Now, one thing that you do need to be aware of is that many times modules change maintainers, that somebody would originally launch the module and was supporting it and then has passed it on to somebody else. And so the new maintainer may or may not have updated the project page description. And so, what you're reading there may have been written by somebody else. But it's still worthwhile having a read over it, because even somebody now who has picked up the maintainership of that module from somebody else, it still is a fair indication to get that sense of, has this person even bothered to update the description on the project page. Then as you scroll down the page, you will get to an area where you will see the maintenance status and the development status of the module. And that's certainly something that's going to be important for you to consider, because if the module maintainer is giving you an indication that this is minimally maintained, or some such indication that lets you know something other than actively maintained and actively developed, that gives you something else that you're going to want to consider when you are going to weigh whether that's a module that you're going to want to use or not. Because you want to pick a module that gives indications that it's actually still being actively maintained and actively supported, actively developed, or you could put yourself in a bit of a bind. Another thing that you'll see on the page as you're scrolling down is there's a link for usage statistics. And there's the summary that appears on the project page that says this report's being used by such and such sites. Now, the problem is that's just an aggregate number that you see there, and you can't really see the breakout of which versions of that module are in use right now. So you'll want to go ahead and click that link that says View Usage Statistics. And then you can scroll down the page and you will see that there's a table there that shows usage statistics by version and by date. And if you scroll a bit further down, I find that to be even a little bit more helpful when they mention the recent release usage. And you can see whether it appears that the module is going up in usage or it's going down in usage. And so that's a metric that I think is something that is probably should weight pretty heavily in your decision when you're comparing different options. See which of those options is being used more, and specifically you're going to want to be taking a look at the release of the module that you're considering using and seeing how those two releases compare with each other. So once you've had a look at the statistics, then another thing that you're going to want to then move on to, we've already looked at the maintenance status and the development status. That's the claims that the module maintainers are making, but you can actually check out some things on your own. For instance, looking on the project page, when you look at the commits and the activity in that module, from the project main page, you'll see in the sidebar that there is the link there that says view all committers and view commits. And actually it's worthwhile looking at both of those things. It's helpful to see how many different committers there are and how active the different committers are. It's actually kind of nice if you see that there are a number of people who are active committers, because then you know that the health of the module isn't dependent on one person having enough time to be able to contribute to the module. And then you'll also want to look at what's the number of commits that each of these different people are making, because many people will end up getting a commit credit on something for something very small that they've done. For instance, I've submitted patches for modules where they had like a typo in the .info file. They had something wrong in the description. And that type of a commit is hardly indicative of the fact that I'm an expert at supporting that module. So as you're looking at the committers, you're going to want to do a little bit further discernment, like how many commits does this person have, and does this look like somebody who really is supporting the project? Then you'll want to take a look at the link that says view commits, and that's going to give you a bit of a timeline showing what releases are the commits being made against, and on what dates have those commits been made. And it's helpful to see that there are being commits made against that project. Because another thing that you should look at is the issue queue and how many open issues there are and how active are the anybody, maintainers or people submitting patches to the issue queue, and whether things are being reviewed, whether they're sitting in the reviewed and tested by the community status without being merged. So putting together the information that you get from the commit history and what you see in the issue queue can give you a pretty clear read on how active that project actually is. Now, something to keep in mind when you're looking at these things, particularly with the issue queue, the number of issues isn't so important. Just because a module doesn't have any open issues doesn't mean that it's a great module. Maybe it's also just not a very highly used module. It may not be very popular. On the other hand, it could be indicative that this module was just so fabulously written that it does what it needs to do, and there really aren't that many issues reported against it. So it really depends on the scope of the module, like how many things it's aimed at doing. And then like when you look at Drupal core, there's the issue queue is quite humongous, and there's tens of thousands of open issues against Drupal core, but that doesn't mean that Drupal is bad. And so it's the same way with a module, so that you don't want to be too naive in the way that you are evaluating the issue queue and the open issues. You want to look more in terms of what are the types of issues that are being reported, how responsive are the maintainers of the module being to those issues. When you're looking at the commits, another thing that you're going to want to consider in the commits, and I'll talk about this a little bit more when I talk about the module's history and the module's future, particularly when we're looking at something, the situation now where Drupal 8 has just gone live. If you're not seeing that there is a stable release yet for Drupal 8, you can still look at the commit log and get a sense of, but are they even working on Drupal 8? So let's look at the situation right now, or maybe I guess, let me hold off. I'll come back to this thought. Assuming that you're building a site in Drupal 7 and how this comes into play. Oh, yes. So I mentioned the activity and the issue queue. So another point is to have a look at actually who the maintainers are on the module, and most importantly, who the active maintainers are right now. And what you'll want to do is have a look at the user profiles of those maintainers. And you'll want to get a sense of how long have these people been a part of the Drupal project. You'll want to take a look at the posts that they've made. You'll want to take a look at how many commits they have on various projects for you to get a bit of a read on what does it appear that this person's level of expertise is in writing modules for Drupal. If you're new to Drupal, you won't necessarily know who the big names are in Drupal and whom the people are that you can trust and say, oh, aha. And I don't want to name names here because I don't want to feel like I'm playing favorites or calling people out or talking bad about anybody. So if you look at their profile page, you'll get a chance to gather some of the statistics about that particular user and get a sense for yourself of, does it seem like this person is active or not? That's not to say that if there's somebody who's got a profile that's relatively new on Drupal and maybe only has the one project that they're supporting, isn't good at writing code. But when you're weighing different modules against each other, that's something that you might take into consideration to say, well, this person looks newer and maybe they don't know all the best practices, or And so, maybe I'm going to be more swayed by the fact that this other module is maintained by somebody who seems to have been around longer or seems to be active on more projects, and it is just giving me a sense that that maybe I can put more trust in this particular person. You can look at the person's websites. You can look at the organizations that they've worked for. You can look at whether they're a member of the Drupal organization. You can actually Google that person and see what results turn up in the search results to get a sense of whether it seems like this maintainer is somebody in whom you'd be willing to place your trust and bet the health of your site on. So now I'll swing back to looking at the module history and the future. So earlier I talked about the idea that you needed to check to see that the releases of the module correspond, okay, Mike, correspond to the version of Drupal that you are using. And I mentioned that maybe what you would see is that there was a module that was written for Drupal 5 that's been ported to Drupal 6. Well, if it's also been ported to Drupal 7, and you see it has been already, or it is being ported to Drupal 8, this is something that gives you an indication of a module that really is well supported. It's maintained, it's active, and it's making its way through the life cycle. And furthermore, what you're getting a chance to see is that this is a module that's stood the test of time. It hasn't been superseded by something else, that somebody else has come up with a way of doing the same type of thing in a better fashion. So when you're looking at a module, it can really help to develop a lot of confidence in the fact that it's made its way through the versions. If you see a module, for instance, that maybe only has Drupal 7, that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, though, because what you may be seeing in that situation is that this is something that has superseded something else. And you may be able to even backtrack and find out, oh, this is the successor to some other module that's been around. But an important point to keep in mind, and this is coming back to what I was mentioning before, is so Drupal 8 has just been released. And I've done a previous Drupal chat about what about Drupal 8 and should we even be considering Drupal 8. I'm not going to go over all of that again, but let's assume for the sake of argument right now that you've decided that you do want to build your site in Drupal 7, or to put it in general terms, the way that the Drupal community does things, it supports the current version and one previous version. So let's say that wherever you are down the road, that you're choosing to build your site on the one previous version of Drupal. When you're choosing your modules, one of the things that you're going to want to look at is there any work on the most current release of Drupal? Or even better, has that module been included in the most current release of Drupal? When you see that situation, that's actually a great indication, like, oh, maybe I'm going to use this module, considering with the next release of Drupal, it's already part of core. And so I know what I'm building is going to be future-proofed. And that's one of the things that you're looking for when you're looking at the future of the module, is whether you're building something that's going to be future-proofed, or whether you're choosing a module that's going to end up potentially being a dead end, and now you're going to need to switch gears somewhere down the road when you're going to be ready to upgrade your Drupal site to a new version of the module. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the releases. So I talked about, has it come through like 5, 6, 7, and it's got something for 8. But even within a particular version of Drupal, there can be branches of that project, of that module. And it can be something that can be, give you a very compelling reason to choose one module over another, because you may see that a module has a number of different branches, and that can give you the indication that this is something that's continuing to evolve. This is something that's continuing to get a lot of attention, because as the maintainers are coming up with better ideas of functionality to provide and better ways to build the code base, they start a new branch. And so just taking a look within the version that you want at, how many branches they have, is a good idea. And then another thing that you want to consider when they do have a number of different branches is to find out about the backwards compatibility. Because you may see that somebody's got a lot of branches and you may say, oh, this is really encouraging. I love the way that they're continuing to push this module forward. And then you may also see, but none of those branches are backwards compatible. And that might change your opinion slightly. You say, oh, well, actually, maybe I don't want to do this because it seems like every time they do a new branch, it's not backwards compatible with the existing branches. And now I might put myself in a situation that I was using one of those older branches and it's going to be difficult for me to move to the new branch. So there's a number of things that you weigh as you are looking at the branches on the given project. When you're looking at the releases and the branches, what you'll see with the contributed module base, and this is an important point to bring up because this is where contributed modules vary quite drastically from Drupal core. The idea of dev releases, alpha releases, beta releases, release candidates, and stable releases. Drupal has a pretty structured process of going from dev all the way up through stable release. With contributed modules, that's not necessarily going to be the case. And so for instance, I think image cache was a module. I'd have to actually look on Drupal.org right now. I don't know if image cache actually ever reached a stable release in Drupal 6. And I think it was got to like a beta release or something. I don't even know if it got to a release candidate, but that's an example of a module that even though it didn't have a release that would have been considered stable, like that was really the version, that's the release that was meant to be used. And it was used on tons of sites and it worked perfectly well. So you don't want to get yourself too caught up in how the module maintainer has named the releases. And it's way too broad a topic for me to try to even give any explanation about like how to interpret why a module maintainer names things in the way that they do, because it's going to really come so much into play with, well, who is the maintainer and what's their personality and how do they approach things. So when you're looking at the various releases that are available right now, you're going to want to rely more on some of the other measures that I've suggested, like looking in the statistics and scrolling far enough down the pages to get that read on what releases are being used and getting a sense of who's really actively maintaining the module at this point for you to be able to get a clearer sense of which one is going to have the upper hand. Something that's really nice to have in a contributed module that you choose is whether that maintainer or whether the community that is using that module has bothered to create anything in the Drupal handbooks. And so you can look for the documentation on that contributed module. Now, certainly, that module should have a README file. If the maintainer hasn't even bothered writing a README file, that's not a really encouraging sign. So you can look into the README file that should give you some decent information about, well, how do you install this and where do you go to configure things and what are some of the expectations about some of the dependencies that the module is going to have. So at a minimum, you should find a README for the file. For the project. Some projects will also integrate with the advanced help module, and that's an encouraging thing to see if they've taken the time to write up their advanced help documentation. And then even better than that is if, like I say, you can look at the handbook and you can see that there are a page or pages in the online Drupal documentation that gives you the information about how to use the module. And it's nice to see if there's a number of people that are contributing to the handbook. So if you can actually find some documentation and read through the documentation, that can be a major factor in your choice in using a module, because you may see like, oh wow, this is great. Like this is not only is it well thought out, but this is really extensive, and I'm going to know how to use this module. Other documentation that you can look at would be to start digging into the code base. And so some of the things that I'm going to talk about to wrap up this discussion here are going to get a little bit more technical and maybe beyond what some people really want to look at when they're considering using a module, because it just may be getting to be too much into the nitty-gritty of things. But if you've got those skills, or you know somebody's got those skills, it's worthwhile digging into this level as well. And so one of the things that you can look at in the code base is to look at their doc blocks, the headers that they put at the beginning of each function, to see how well they're commenting their code. And so that's another form of documentation that you can find, is the doc blocks that they've created and the comments that they've put in their code. Also, when you start looking into the code base, modules that are well thought out and well supported will also generally have a file that's called like module name.api.php. And what that can give you an indication of is some of the ways that the module gives you to be able to hook into that module or to customize that module. And also keeping in mind the same type of concepts and concerns as being able to hook into and customize a module is to get a sense of how nicely that module plays with existing modules. How aware is it of other maybe APIs that are out there or other popular modules that are out there, and providing things that will allow this module that you're considering to hook into other modules. So for an example, some modules will have their views.inc files that give them a way that views can expose parts of that module. Or rules is another module that will look for these .inc files in a certain way. So you consider how that module allows you to play with it and customize it, and consider how that module is playing with other existing module options that are out there. And again, this is going to require that you have a little bit of a look at the code base. And so to wrap this up, with the discussion of looking at the code base, one final thing that may be a deciding factor for you is that you know you've got a particular feature set that you need in building your site, and you're looking at modules that will provide the feature set that you need. At the same time, there's a certain value in choosing a module that really provides only the features that you need and not everything, including the kitchen sink. And one thing that you may want to consider is actually the size of the code base. And for a couple of reasons, it's worthwhile to have a look at the size of the code base. One is that the more lines of code that there are written, the greater the opportunity for there to be exploits and vulnerabilities in that code. You know, the fewer lines of code, the less opportunity that you have of something like that happening. Also, the fewer lines of code, the easier it is to understand how that module is working. And then finally, the lighter weight the module is, the fewer lines of code that it has, the less of a performance hit you take on your site by enabling that module. So, you know, I'd say all things considered, if everything else in your exploration has pretty much given you the impression that these two modules are equal and you still haven't been able to decide which one you're going to choose, I'd say smaller is better. You know, look at the module that's got fewer lines of code, that is lighter weight. So those are my thoughts on ways that I approach looking at modules. And the truth of the matter is, while I've done my best to give you some reasonably objective and systematic ways to approach this, it comes down to a mixture of art and science. And in the end, it's you're not always going to have a clear-cut winner. And what you may do is just say, well, let me take them for a test run. Let me set up a sandbox. Let me install the one module and play with it and see how I like it. And if you were happy enough with it, you might just say, okay, well, just, I'm going to stick with this one. This is the one that I happened to install first, and I liked it. I was fine. I'm not going to bother checking the other one. Or you may feel like you really do want to be able to take both of them for a test run to see, which one seems to suit your fancy better. And then the final thing is, obviously, if you've got contacts in the Drupal community, it's worthwhile to talk with your contacts and find out if they've got an opinion on the module, which kind of brings us back a little bit to what I was mentioning in the beginning about DrupalModules.com. Gives you a bit of that information with people rating the modules. But if you can talk to somebody directly, that's something that can be very useful for you. You can go into IRC, you can look in the forums, you can go to meetups, you can go on to groups.drupal.org, and you can see if you can get somebody's opinion on it, or if you can, if you're able to communicate with them directly. Or perhaps you may even find, if you do a search on that module, some people may have even written their review on a module, maybe compared it with something else and have chosen their winner. So I hope that's given you some good ideas, a bit of a way that you can sort through your module options. And lacking any questions in the stream here, I'll give a shout out for any questions that you have, going once, going twice, going 3 times. If people wanted to be able to ask anything. Actually, I guess I'm seeing that Mike and I are the only ones that are live right now anyway, so you anonymous visitors can't even put a question in the stream. So with that, I will thank everybody for who came to watch this live, and those of you who are watching the recording later on. I hope you enjoy the show, and if you do want to have the opportunity to interact with me more, you could either hit me up via Twitter, or on the replay there, I've got Discuss installed, and you can put your comments in there, and I'll be happy to interact with you through the comments. Thanks again, Mike, for jumping in and saving me being the co-host here and getting the pieces recorded. And next week, I am planning to talk about being a Drupal freelancer. So I'll get the links posted in various places for that, and I look forward to next week and visiting with you again. Thanks again, Mike. Have a great day.